term to us. It was actually discovered towards the end of the 19th, 20th century. And empathy was really a word invented out of the German culture that had to do with how an artist looks at a piece of art. That's where it originated. And empathy means to feel into. To feel into. Okay? Taking the method of phenomenology, she's going to apply that to empathy. Okay? What is Stein's understanding of empathy? And I hope I can explain this to you, that you can understand it. And I'm still kind of working through this on my own, but I want to share it with you because I think it's really kind of cool. And the fact that she is as bright as and intelligent as she is, I think that also makes it, it gives it more credibility. But empathy is to see a subject like a person, and as they're going through something, we perceive them. So if I see somebody who is grieving or at a loss for whatever reason, very often what we do, first of all, is we simulate what we see. So I have this sense of, I'm going to try to step in their shoes. Okay? Stein would say, that's not empathy. That's not the problem with empathy. Another thing is, and I know that I've done this as a minister, person's going through loss, and yet you try to read their face or their expression or their words, and you try to reason yourself into their mind. It's almost like the sense of, I'm reading your mind and what you're going through. Edith Stein would say, that's not the problem with empathy. The problem with empathy is, I'm a subject, that person is a subject. I am going to allow that person to feel their pain and to own their pain, and I perceive their pain, but it's not my pain. Okay? And as I look at their pain or their loss or whatever it is that they're going through, empathy, in a sense, does not bridge the gap between myself and that person, but it discloses the gap. It reveals the gap. So I allow them to kind of own their pain so that I can respect their pain. And it's not mine. I'll give you a good example. At my mother's funeral, often the priest goes in, and we go and we say our I'm sorry to the family. I'm on the other side of this now. Okay? So people are coming up to me. I couldn't believe what some people told me. Seriously? Oh my gosh, sorry, oh my gosh. One person came up and said, your mother, she's in such a better place right now. And I'm thinking, now you can say that to me, but don't say it to my nephews and my nieces. They don't want to hear that. See what I'm saying? So you see, respect where the person is at. Allow empathy to disclose the gap between myself and the subject, and respect that. And then, in turn, learn something from it. Okay? And then react. Okay? Or, at my mother's funeral, I completely understand what you're going through. No, you don't. I'm sorry. You might have lost a mother, but you have no idea right now what I'm going through. No? Or the one that really, really struck me was, well, Father, both your mom and dad are gone, now you're an orphan. I'm like, and I wanted to say, you know what, my mother's going to haunt you, you're in trouble. but do you see what I'm saying? Do you see where she's coming from? you know? So it really is, because sometimes I think, and it's good that we are trying to make a connection with each other, but she's trying to say, you know, there's a problem here. You can try to put yourself in another person's foot, but you'll never know what they're going through. You can try to read their minds, but you'll never know what they're going through. But allow the gap to be disclosed and revealed, and respect that gap, and respect where they're at, and react that way. Okay? I just, guys understand that?
Yes.
Well, actually, I would say, I'm not sure if that's what, Ryan, you're closer to this than I am. Was that pretty good? Okay, we'll talk about it later, Ryan. Okay. Yeah, and the other thing is, empathy reveals a radical otherness, so that I don't impose myself on the person, right? Like there's this respectful distance, at least in the mind. We can go up and we can be consoling and all that, but there's still this respectful distance of just allowing them to go through whatever it is that they're going through. Okay? Cool. So remember, this is what she's talking about, and she's kind of going through all this conflict in her life, and she chooses empathy. Okay? So we got that, and now another turning point. This is really, really cool. Because this is where the Catholic faith is going to start to take on more of a prominent role in her life. And in the most simplest of ways, to this very intellectual, outstanding mind. She has a real good, when she goes to start studying phenomenology, she gets involved with many Christians who are phenomenologists. Edmund Husserl was a Jewish person who converted to the Lutheran faith, and there were several other Jewish people that converted to different Christian faiths. She is going to run into a good friend of hers. Her name is Pauline Reinach. They're touring the old city of Frankfurt. She says, hey, you want to go into the cathedral? And he says, yeah, let's go into the cathedral. Let's see what's going on there. And I'm going to read this section as to what her experience was. So just listen to this. That's the cathedral right there. So listen to this. We stopped in at the cathedral for a few minutes, and while we looked around in respectful silence, a woman carrying a market basket came in and knelt down in one of the pews to pray briefly. This was something entirely new to me. To the synagogue or to the Protestant churches which I had visited, one went in only for services. But here was someone interrupting her everyday shopping errands to come into this church. Although no other person was in it, as though she were here for an intimate conversation, I could never forget that. The common act of a Catholic piety impressed Edith with the sense of an interior and intimate conversation. The possibility of such an interior conversation must have intrigued the young philosopher, who would spend years introspecting and examining her consciousness. The subject of Stein's doctoral project is the question of empathy, particularly what it means to share someone's experience in a second-hand way. A mother who winces when she sees a young child scrape her knee is experiencing the child's pain empathetically. Edith was perhaps experiencing this anonymous woman's sense of intimacy and communion with an interior interlocutor. The phenomenological method not only attracted a woman who was keen on introspection and carefully paying attention to interior consciousness, it also seems to have deepened Stein's awareness of her own interiority, and through empathy, the interior lives of others. Being aware of one's interior reality is essential to the spiritual life. Similarly, empathy is an essential skill for any spiritual director. Those of you who are studying spiritual direction right now. So she's, again, that whole phenomenological method. The woman comes in, she's taken back by it. What is she here for? She's praying. This doesn't happen in most of the churches I've been at, and it just touches her. You know, something as simple as that. Here's the other thing about being a witness. and this is kind of off the cuff. I mentioned this to some people at one of our leadership meetings. Pope Paul VI wrote an encyclical on evangelization, and at the very crux of it, he says, most people are attracted to a witness of the faith more than a teacher. Okay. If they're attracted to a teacher, it's probably because the teacher is a witness. Okay. Why I say that is, people watch us. They do. They watch how we live our life. You know, we have such a great opportunity right now in the church, in this day and age, where we have less people going to church. We actually have, there are always possibilities, probably when we least expect it, where people are looking at us, and we have the power to be a great witness to them. Take a look at what happened there. This extremely bright, intelligent woman, now grown up, writing her PhD dissertation, walks into a cathedral and is struck by a lady carrying in her bags and praying by herself in silence. November of 1917, Paula Reinhardt's brother tragically dies in the war, and her brother is a very good friend of Edith. So Edith Reinhardt has died, and his wife, Edith visits his wife, and she thinks that she's going to be in difficult grief. And again, here she is, she's a Christian. She finds Adolf's wife suffering, but at a great level of peace. Okay? And of course, it disturbs her. Okay? Again, another example of someone coming into her life, she's paying attention to it, she's trying to take it in, and this is what she says. It was my first encounter with the cross, and the divine power it bestows on those who carry it. For the first time I was seeing with my very eyes the church, born from her Redeemer's suffering, triumphant over the sting of death. That was the moment my unbelief collapsed, and Christ shone forth in the mystery of the cross. Suffering has spoken a lot to her. Huh? Grief and suffering has spoken a lot to her, and it's something that she has a hard time making sense out of, and finally she connects it to the cross of Christ. And it's going to change, it changes her entire life and her whole worldview of things. Okay? So, this is really cool. So, Edith, in 1921, she goes to the house of real good friends, Theodore and Hedwig Meritus, and they're not Catholic. They're Christian, but they're not Catholic. She's given the book of the life of Teresa of Avila. She starts reading it one night. She cannot fall asleep. She stays up all night. She reads the entire book. And after she reads the book, she says, "This is the truth." Within a matter of weeks, she purchases a missal that basically is the outline of the Mass that they had at that day, the Catholic Mass. She purchases a catechism and reads it. She goes to Mass for the first time. She's participating in it. She's understanding it. After Mass, she goes to the priest and says, "I want to be baptized." And the priest says, "You have to go through instruction." And she says to the priest, "Father, test me." And he did. And she knew, she knew an awful lot, but he was totally overwhelmed by her knowledge of the faith in such a short period of time. So she's baptized, and this is an interesting thing. She chooses to be baptized on January 1st. And it's 1922, I believe. I think that's a misprint. On the feast of the circumcision of the Lord. Okay. I think we call it the, what do we call it now, the presentation of the temple? Yeah, presentation of the Lord. So, but think about it, Yom Kippur, and now the circumcision, she's always, like in the back of her mind, she always understands, I think, her Jewish roots. Okay? She's not going to let that go. I also wonder if there's a little bit of guilt there because of how her mother reacts to her baptism, which she kind of hides from her for a while, but finally eventually tells her, and her mother is upset. Okay, going back to that relationship with her mom. Okay? She wants to enter the Carmelite monastery life right away. She gets a spiritual director. The spiritual director tells her to hold off. She needs to be a Catholic in the lay life for a while to understand that. She needs to understand the workings of the church a little bit more. She needs to be kind of like fostering and nourishing her Catholic faith. And I also think in the back of her mind, being baptized upset her mother. Going into a the isolation of a cloistered monastery would just completely devastate her mother. And I think in the back of her mind, she just doesn't want to do that. So from 1923, 1931, as a new Catholic, she teaches at a girls' school with the Dominican nuns. And now she's becoming popular throughout all of Europe. She's going to places like Vienna and some of the large cities and giving talks on various topics. She was a great proponent of women's issues of the day. She would talk about community and social things. So she's a very popular speaker. So she's getting to be very well known. Fortunately, we've got this thing that's kind of hanging over her life and the life of a lot of the Catholic Jews, Catholics with Jewish ancestry and all the Jews in Europe. So the Nazi Party is formed in 1921. There's this growing threat of the Nazi regime, and this is going to determine Edith's movements to the end of her life. During this 10-year period, before she goes into the Carmelite monastery, Edith remains faithful to the church and is just searching very deep within herself to find the meanings and significance of her life. From 32 to 33, she's going to lecture at the German Institute of Scientific Pedagogy, methods of teaching, and in 1933, suddenly she's going to be dismissed from her position by a government decree under the Nazi regime because they know that she has Jewish blood. And we're going to go through this really quickly, but this is what's going to happen over the course of the next couple of years. 33, Hitler becomes Chancellor of Germany. In 33, the Enabling Act is passed giving Hitler dictatorial powers. There's a national boycott of Jewish businesses begins in April of that year. The first concentration camp, Dachau, is established in 33. The Night of the Long Knives, Hitler eliminates his potential rivals within the Nazi Party. The next year, August 2nd, after Hindenburg's death, Hitler proclaims himself as the leader of the Third Reich. And in September of the next year, the Nuremberg laws are enacted, stripping Jews of their citizenship and their rights. And almost in response to that, Edith enters the Carmelite convent. She has a very good understanding of what's going on in the world and what's coming down on her. She has a very good understanding, and basically with her spiritual director, she says, if I don't do it now, I'm not going to be able to do it. So I really want to go into the Carmel now. So she goes into the Carmel in 1933. She takes the religious name Teresa Benedicta of the Cross, or Teresa Blessed of the Cross. Teresa meaning after Teresa of Avila, the book that she read that really was the major component of her taking that complete turn towards Catholicism, and of the Cross meaning John of the Cross. Okay. She makes temporary vows in 35. When she goes into the Carmel, her mother is devastated. Edith writes to her every single week for the next 3 years. Her mother never responds. But Edith, in her own way, has found something that has answered the stirring within her own heart. Okay? Final vows in 1938. And interesting, right around this time, one of her sisters, Rosa, becomes a Third Order Carmelite and will actually be living in the same will end up, they'll be living in the same monastery right before they're taken away by the Nazis. So Rosa, one of her older sisters, has also converted to the Catholic faith. Kristallnacht, November 9th, 1938, where hundreds of synagogues and businesses are destroyed by the Nazi regime. Jews are placed into ghettos. If you've ever seen Schindler's List, Kristallnacht is that one brutal scene where they just take everything away from the Jewish community, and they force them into a ghetto, and then they come back later the next day or that night, and anyone who's still left, they eliminate. Just a really sad part of that story, and a part of the history here. Because things are starting to get very tenuous for her, she transfers to the Carmelite Monastery in Echt, Netherlands, December 31st, 1938, thinking that she's going to be safe there. Okay. September 1939, Germany invades Poland and World War II begins. In 1940, the German forces sweep through France, Belgium, and unfortunately into Holland, into the Netherlands, where she's at. And there's always this debate. Did the church say enough about what happened to the Jewish people during World War II? And in some ways you could say, no, we didn't. In some ways you could say, well, yeah, we did. Here's one of the reasons where you could say we did. The bishops of Holland issue a pastoral letter that's going to be read at all the masses throughout their diocese, which is where this monastery is at, that they denounce the way that the Jewish people are being treated. And they call a halt to any kind of unjust acts towards the Jews. And the Nazi response, and it's very quick, like within a week, they go through the Netherlands and they round up all the Catholic and Christians of Jewish descent, and she's on one of their lists. So she's basically being hunted down. On Sunday, August 2nd, 1942, after their evening prayer, Edith and her sister Rosa are taken by the Gestapo, placed on a train filled with more people that could fit into the car. Again, if you've seen some of the movies, like Schindler's List, they do a real good job of depicting what took place on the cars going to some of the death camps. Couple eyewitness reports. The car that she was on actually stopped in her hometown of Breslau, okay? And Auschwitz is about maybe 100, 150 miles away from there, but on the way it stops there, and the car, the door opens, there's this nun, and there's this guy who takes in this account where this nun addresses him and says, "We have no sanitation on the car. Is there anything you can do for us?" And then he looks at him again and says, "We're on our way to our death." And he looks at her and says, "Sister, do the rest of the people on the train know that?" And she said, "No, I'm here to do the best I can to comfort them." Okay. So another account from some of the people, and they're not going to be at Auschwitz very long. When they got to the camp, some of the eyewitness accounts of her was that she was calm, peaceful, but you could read some fear because she knew what was coming. And she said that she really tended to some of the people that were actually, they were like out of their minds, and tending to some of the children in the death camp before they ushered them into the chambers where they would be killed. They're transported to Auschwitz death camp and martyred on August 9th, 1942. So that's her feast, the feast day that we celebrate on this August 9th, 1942. When she's taken from the Carmel monastery, the last words that she says to the nuns that she's leaving, and she grabs Rosa because they're going to take Rosa with her, and she tells Rosa with the other nuns to hear, she says, "Let us go and die for our people." Now, it sounds kind of interesting, doesn't it, that she would say those words? But again, I think in the back of her mind, there's the whole Jewish roots thing, you know? And also the whole idea of what a martyr is, and the possibility of her death is for the Catholic Christian, okay? Edith tended to those who were frightened and fearful of their situation, her calm demeanor and a comforting presence to many. Here are some of the depictions of her as a young woman in the middle, a statue of her with the Star of David on it, and this statue over her depicting different parts of her life. Her life as a teacher, her life as a nun, and it's really hard to see this, but she's carrying a crucifix with Jesus' head hanging over. And one depicting her in, I think it's probably Jewish garb. Okay? Postscript to a life searching for the truth, and we're getting down to the end of this. I told you that there's a certain process that we go through in terms of canonization. Since the church declared her a martyr, she only needed one miracle for her canonization. So in 1987, as her cause is coming up, and this whole kindred spirit of JP2 and her, you know, especially through the intellectual life and phenomenology and all that, there's an outcry by the Jewish community as to why is the Catholic Church beatifying her on the way to canonization? Are you doing this because you're proselytizing for more Jews to convert? How will you handle her Jewish roots and respect that in the midst of this process that you're going through? Okay. And it became difficult for John Paul II. He'll tell you, in the words of her, that the beatification was much different than the canonization. Why is that? And actually, I think her beatification, which is the step right before becoming a saint, he does a couple things. He goes to Jerusalem. He goes to the Wailing Wall to pray. Okay? He sets up this major dialogue between the Vatican and Israel, and even within Rome, to strengthen the relationship between Catholics and Jews. And he's just really, really good at that. And he actually has a prayer service that I think lasts for a couple days to remember the victims of the Holocaust. Okay. So, and in some ways, I think he wanted that to happen so that it would be clear to the Jewish people, we're doing this to recognize her life as a Catholic saint and also recognizing the beauty of her Jewish roots. Okay? The other part of this, and it's kind of a shadow over our church, is that some of the people that were involved in killing the Jews were Christians and were Catholics. We have to own up to that. Okay? Don't want to make light of that. So that was another reason as to why beatification and the canonization of the church. So you can imagine the Pope kind of weighing all those things back and forth, but he did an awesome job of it. Here's what he said at the canonization. Dear brothers and sisters, because she was Jewish, Edith Stein was taken with her sister Rosa and many other Catholic Jews from the Netherlands to the concentration camp in Auschwitz, where she died with them in the gas chambers. Today we remember them all with deep respect. A few days before her deportation, the woman religious had dismissed the question about a possible rescue. Do not do it. Why should I be spared? Is it not right that I should gain no advantage from my baptism? If I cannot share the lot of my brothers and sisters, my life, in a certain sense, is destroyed. From now on, as we celebrate the memory of this new saint from year to year, we must also remember the Sheol, which is the whole thing that the Jews went through in terms of their the Holocaust and all the events surrounding it. I think it's a very broad way that they use to kind of recognize the cruelty and the extermination of their people. That cruel plan to exterminate a people, a plan to which millions of our Jewish brothers and sisters fell victim, may the Lord let his face shine upon them and grant them peace. And he goes on to say, St. Teresa Benedicta of the Cross shall say to us all, do not accept anything as the truth if it lacks love, and do not accept anything as love which lacks truth. One without the other becomes a destructive lie. Okay? Finally, the new saint teaches us that love for Christ undergoes suffering. Whoever truly loves does not stop at the prospect of suffering. He accepts communion and suffering with the one he loves. Aware of what her Jewish origins implied, Edith Stein spoke eloquently about them. Beneath the cross, I understood the destiny of God's people. Indeed, today I know far better what it means to be the Lord's bride under the sign of the cross. But since it is a mystery, and it's interesting that she's come to admit that because of her intellectual prowess, it can never be understood by reason alone. Okay? Remember the whole idea of humility and being humbled by what life kind of presents to us. So just want to offer just a couple of takeaways to sum things up for us. First takeaway is something that she said, a very subtle one in one of my books, is that study is service. We worship, we pray, we do spiritual reading, but she would say, study God. Okay? Your intellect is there for a reason. Okay? That study is a part of our service to the Lord. The more that we can learn, the more that we can grow to a better understanding, and also, as I would say, the more you know, the more you don't know, the more there is to know. Okay? I think that makes a lot of sense. When she goes through these like in her hidden life as a young child, when she stops praying and then comes back and she's going through this conversion experience, they ask, why did you convert? Which is a good question to ask, right? She would say, my secret is my own. And on the deepest level, what she's saying is, I can't tell you why. I can't explain it. I don't have the words for it. Okay? Something much deeper than that. It's like that, what she said at the end of the homily. Mystery, even beyond reason. God is a mystery, even beyond reason. So my secret is my own, and I need to own that to it. And you know, I've known people who have tried to live out the spiritual life, and you know that they've gone through a great deal of hard work and growing closer to God, and they can't explain it. It's just something that happens. You know, it's something. It's that part of life of the Spirit where God communicates, and it's hard for us to describe. That's why I say to the spouses, you'll never know your wife completely. You'll never know your husband completely, because there's a part of there that only God knows. Okay? And you want to foster that part. Okay? Make that part grow. I think that's really interesting for our study for these four Carmelite saints. Each one of them lost a parent at an early age. I think that's a significant loss